The first electric train in the old city. The old city had always been a place of slow footsteps and quiet evenings. Narrow stone streets, twisted like forgotten memories, and lanterns glowed softly from windows carved centuries ago. Life here did not rush. It drifted. People spoke gently, shopkeepers opened late, and the nights were filled with the sound of crickets rather than engines. But one winter morning, that silence began to tremble. Edward Barnes, a curious 12-year-old boy with bright eyes and a head full of impossible dreams, noticed something strange near the central market. Men wearing dark uniforms were pulling long wires above the streets, wires that glimmered like silver threads under the cold sun. He stood beneath them, staring upward. Electric lines, a voice behind him said. Edward turned. It was Mr. Harrison, the old bookseller, leaning on his cane with a knowing smile. They say an electric train is coming, he whispered, as if sharing a sacred secret. A train, here, inside the old city. Edward asked, wide-eyed. Yes, Mr. Harrison nodded. Times are changing faster than these stones can remember. For days, the city buzzed with rumors. Some believed the train would fly. Others said it would breathe fire. The elders shook their heads and muttered that the city was too old, too fragile for such machines. But Edward wasn't afraid. He felt something new, something alive, stirring inside him, a feeling he had never known before. Every morning he woke up early and ran through the narrow alleys to watch the workers. He listened to the clatter of metal, the hum of electricity, the footsteps of engineers marking the beginning of a new age. The streets felt different, not quieter, but expectant, like the city was holding its breath. One rainy afternoon, he climbed the old clock tower, something he wasn't allowed to do, just to see where the wires led. From above, the entire city unfolded beneath him. Rooftops wet and shining, streets twisting like veins of an ancient creature. And at the heart of it, the tracks were being laid, curving proudly through plazas and archways. He watched in awe as sparks flew from the workers' tools, tiny stars being born on the earth. That evening, as he walked home, Edward passed a small bakery where two elderly women were arguing. This train will bring trouble, one said. Crowds, noise, strangers, and maybe opportunity, the other countered. Maybe good things, too. Edward slowed his steps. He couldn't explain why, but he felt connected to those metal rails, as if they carried not just electricity, but the promise of something waiting specifically for him. When he reached home, his father, Thomas Barnes, a quiet tailor who preferred old ways over new, frowned at him. "You've been near those tracks again," he said. "I just want to see what's coming," Edward replied gently. Thomas sighed. This city survives because it stays the same. Machines don't belong here. Edward looked at the flickering oil lamp on their table. But maybe they do. Maybe it's our turn to move forward. His father said nothing, which for Thomas Barnes meant he disagreed strongly. That night, Edward couldn't sleep. He heard the faint sound of hammers echoing from the distant streets. He imagined the electric train, tall, bright, humming with light, gliding through the ancient gates of the old city like a visitor from the future. He closed his eyes and whispered to himself, "I will be there when it arrives, no matter what." And far away, under the pale moonlight, the days grew colder, and winter settled over the old city like a soft silver blanket. But beneath that calm surface, excitement churned like warm currents under ice. Everywhere Edward went, people were talking about the electric train. At the blacksmith's shop, sparks flew as Mr. Doyle hammered steel and muttered, "Electricity in these streets. Never thought I'd live to see it." At the riverside, fishermen tied their boats and argued about whether the train would scare away the birds. At the school, Edward and his friends whispered about rumors. It will run without steam. It will be silent. It will glow in the night. But in every corner of the city, one truth echoed. Nothing would ever be the same. One afternoon, Edward followed the sound of heavy steps to the central square. Workers were installing a towering steel pole, connecting the final section of the overhead wires. A group of men in dark coats stood nearby, engineers from the capital, with leather maps and brass tools brightened by the winter sun. Edward squeezed through the crowd until he stood near the youngest engineer, a man with sandy hair and gentle eyes. His name tag read, "William Carter, Electrical Department." Bravery flickered in Edward's chest. "Sir, will the train really run through the old gates?" William looked down at him, surprised, but then his surprise softened into a warm smile. "Yes," he said, "and it will run proudly. Your city is one of the last to receive an electric line." "Why here?" Edward asked. William paused, choosing his words carefully. "Because history and the future should meet, and your old city is the bridge between them." Edward's heart thumped like a tiny drum. No one had ever spoken about his home like that, not even the elders. That evening, he told his father what the engineer said. Thomas Barnes listened without interrupting, his expression unreadable. "History and the future should meet," Edward repeated. His father slowly folded a shirt, smoothing the cloth carefully. "Words are easy, Edward," he murmured. "But when the future arrives, it does not always knock. Sometimes it breaks the door." Edward didn't know how to answer that. Later that night, The sound of metal wheels echoed from far away. The workers were testing carts on the track. Edward climbed onto the roof of their house, wrapped in a blanket, and watched the glow of lanterns moving along the rails like fireflies dancing in a line. The city seemed awake, alert, as if waiting. I'm waiting too. The night of first light, the announcement came one foggy morning. The electric train would arrive in exactly 3 days. The entire city burst into motion. Banners were hung from balconies. Bakers prepared sweet pastries. Children practiced songs. Merchants decorated their shops with bright cloth. Even the elders admitted with reluctant nods that it was a historic moment. Edward spent every waking hour near the station, a station that had been transformed from a quiet stone platform into a shining gateway with polished rails and tall iron arches. On the evening before the arrival, the sky was deep blue, the air crisp, and tiny lamps flickered in windows across the city. Edward walked toward the station with his best friend, Henry Blake, a cheerful boy with laughter as loud as church bells. "Do you think it'll really glow?" Henry asked. "I think," Edward smiled. "I think it'll be brighter than anything we've ever seen." But when they reached the station, they found someone already waiting. William Carter, the young engineer. He sat on a bench, sketching the station by lantern light. When he saw the boys, he waved them over. "Excited?" he asked. Edward nodded. Henry practically shouted, "Yes." William laughed softly and handed Edward the sketchbook. On the page was a drawing of the train, sleek, long, and elegant, with a roof curved like a silver moon. Edward stared at it, breathless. "It looks alive." "In a way," William said, "it is. Electricity is a kind of heartbeat." The lantern beside them flickered, as if agreeing. Suddenly, a low hum traveled through the wires overhead, faint, distant, but unmistakable. The boy's eyes widened. What was that? Henry gasped. William stood, listening intently. "That," he said slowly, "is the test current. The line is awake now." The hum grew stronger for a moment, then faded into the night. Edward felt a shiver, not of fear, but of awe. The city had never felt so alive, so full of unseen movement. When he returned home, his father was sitting by the window, staring at the wires above the street. "You were at the station again," Thomas said softly. Edward nodded. His father sighed, not in anger, but in resignation. "Tomorrow," he said, "your world begins. And maybe mine ends." Edward stepped closer. "It won't end, Father. It will just change." Thomas did not answer, but something in his eyes softened. That night, Edward couldn't sleep. He lay awake, listening to the faint hum in the wires. A strange sound, the heartbeat of tomorrow. And as the moon rose over the ancient rooftops, the old city felt like a giant clock ticking toward dawn, toward a moment that would rewrite its history forever. The day the earth held its breath, the morning of the arrival felt nothing like an ordinary day. The air was crisp, the sky pale gold, and the sound of footsteps echoed through every stone street, as if the entire city had woken at the same moment. Edward stood with his mother near the station gate, his heart thumping like a tiny drum. Henry waved from a distance, calling out, "Edward, come stand with me, you'll see better from here." Vendors lined the road, selling small flags, fresh bread, sweet cakes, and little wooden toy trains painted in bright colors. Children clutched them tightly. Even the old clock tower seemed to hum with anticipation. As the sun climbed higher, the mayor stepped onto the raised platform with the engineers, including William Carter. A hush fell. People leaned forward. Even the birds paused on the rooftops, as if the whole city was holding its breath. William raised his hand toward the overhead wires. A faint vibration passed through them. Edward felt it in his bones, a tingling, humming whisper in the air. Then, a distant bell rang, not the old steam whistle, not the deep horn of carriages. This was a clear, melodic chime, electric and gentle, like a song of the future. The ground beneath the crowd trembled softly. Children squeezed their parents' hands. Mothers lifted their little ones onto their shoulders. And slowly, very slowly, the train appeared from the far archway of the old stone bridge. Silver, sleek. Its metal body shimmered under the morning sun. Blue sparks flickered softly along the overhead wires. People gasped. Some cried. Some clapped their hands over their mouths. Edward felt like his heart had stopped. The train glided toward them without the smoke or thunder of steam engines. No roaring fire. No clouds of black soot. Just a smooth, gliding hum, peaceful, steady, almost comforting. William whispered to the mayor, but Edward caught the words anyway. The first electric train in this region. And it belongs to this city. When the train finally stopped at the platform, silence stretched for a moment, a long, fragile moment before the whole crowd erupted in applause. He just stared, awestruck, feeling as if he had stepped out of time and into a dream. The doors slid open with a gentle hiss. Light poured out, warm, golden, inviting. And that was the moment Edward whispered, "Father was wrong." The future doesn't always break the door. Sometimes it opens quietly. The first ride into tomorrow, the platform of old Central Station, was glowing under the warm, amber lamps as the clock struck 6. The air carried a gentle excitement, a kind of quiet thrill that belongs to moments when history is just about to take its first breath. Edward stood near the entrance of the shining electric train, his hands slightly trembling. This was the moment he had dreamed of, fought for, argued for, and worked for through endless nights. But now that it was finally here, a strange fear softened his knees. "Edward," Henry called from behind. "What are you thinking? This is your train. Get in." Edward forced a small smile and stepped inside. The interior greeted him like a warm embrace. Polished wooden floors reflected the golden glow of the lamps above. Soft blue fabric covered every seat, newly stitched, clean, welcoming. The brass handles gleamed like tiny suns. For a moment, Edward simply stood still, breathing it all in. "This doesn't look like a train," he whispered to himself. "It looks like the beginning of a new world." Then William Carter, their chief technician, walked down the aisle, tightening a valve here, turning a dial there, ensuring everything was perfect. He looked up at Edward and smiled. "First time is always magic," he said gently. "Sit by the window. You'll remember this ride for the rest of your life." Edward nodded and took his seat. A soft chime rang. The electric engine hummed like a sleeping bird waking up. The carriage vibrated, not violently, not roughly, just a gentle shiver. Then the train moved. It wasn't a jolt like the old steam engines. It wasn't a loud growl. It wasn't a shaking start. It was a glide, smooth, graceful, almost floating. Edward felt his breath catch in his throat as the view outside began to shift. The city that he had known all his life, the stone houses, the narrow lantern-lit lanes, the small wooden bridges, all slowly drifted past the windows. Henry leaned over from the opposite seat. "How does it feel, Edward, sitting inside your own dream?" Edward didn't answer immediately. He placed his hand on the cold glass and watched people gathering outside. Children ran along the tracks, waving both hands. Old men removed their hats. Women, carrying baskets, smiled proudly. Even the critics, the ones who once mocked the idea of an electric train, stood in silence, watching the miracle glide away. "It feels," Edward whispered, "as if I'm watching the city love us back." The train picked up a little more speed, and the overhead wires sparkled. The soft buzz of electricity filled the air, steady, comforting, almost musical. As they passed the bakery street, the scent of fresh bread drifted through the ventilator. At the old archway, pigeons burst into flight. Near the river bend, sunlight bounced off the water and scattered tiny patterns of light across the carriage walls. It was like the city had become a moving painting. Henry nudged him again. Imagine, Edward, trains like this in every town, every city. People traveling faster, safer, cleaner. And Edward imagined it. He saw a world connected like a chain of silver paths, villages transformed, people traveling with ease, new jobs, new hopes, new beginnings. His eyes glistened as he imagined children decades later saying, "My grandfather rode the first electric train." The train moved deeper into the countryside. The houses faded, the roads narrowed. Green fields stretched under the evening sky, glowing with the last light of the sun. Then came the river bridge. As they crossed it, the entire city lights reflected beneath them. Lanterns flickered. Boats drifted like tiny sparks. The moon rose slowly behind the clouds, bathing everything in silver. For a moment, everything was silent. No wind, no chatter. So this is what change feels like, he thought. Not loud, not frightening, but peaceful, beautiful. Right. Henry tapped his shoulder softly. You did this. Remember that. The old city slowly disappeared behind them, not as something they left behind, but as something they had transformed. Ahead lay open fields, distant hills, glowing tracks, and a future wide enough for every dream Edward had ever carried. The night the city held its breath, the sun slipped behind the rooftops of the old city, leaving behind long golden trails on the cobblestones. Edward stood near the grand electric station, staring at the massive iron structure glowing under the early evening lamps. The train rested quietly on the tracks, tall, silver, polished like a sleeping giant waiting for its command to rise. Electric sparks shimmered around the overhead wires as workers tightened bolts and checked glass meters, glowing softly in the dusk. Henry came jogging toward him, slightly out of breath. Tonight's the real test, he said. A full-speed run through the old tunnels, across the river bridge, and back before midnight. Edward swallowed hard. This wasn't just another test. This was history breathing down their necks. Behind them, crowds had gathered along the fences, men in wool coats, newspaper boys, factory workers, mothers holding lanterns, old men leaning on canes. Everyone wanted to witness the moment the city finally stepped into the future. The chief engineer, William Carter, walked toward his team with calm authority. His coat fluttered with each step, his pocket watch swinging lightly. "All right, everyone," he announced, voice strong and clear. "Tonight, the old city sees what electric power can truly do." The workers cheered softly. Edward felt goosebumps rise on his arms. Inside the train, warm golden lamps glowed against the polished wooden walls. The leather straps, the brass handles, the neatly painted gauges. Everything looked like a blend of craft and magic. Edward ran his fingers over a panel, feeling the faint vibration of pure energy pulsing through the metal. "It feels alive," Edward whispered. Henry nodded. "That's because it is." Outside, the sky darkened to deep blue. A cool wind swept through the station, carrying the scent of coal fires, river mist, and distant chimneys. William stepped inside the leading carriage. "Everyone in position," he said. "We move when the signalman drops the flag." Edward and Henry took their seats behind the instrument desk. The hum increased, soft, steady, comforting, like the heartbeat of a giant creature waking from sleep. Across the station, lanterns flickered. Children sat on rooftops to get a better view. An old violin player began a slow tune, something nostalgic, something ancient. The flag dropped. William leaned forward. "Power up." Edward pushed the main lever. A gentle surge, a rising hum. The wheels trembled, not with fear, but anticipation. The train glided forward, slowly at first, then faster, and faster still. Crowds erupted into cheers as the silver giant slid across the platform like moonlight cutting through darkness. Shops shook slightly, birds scattered into the air, dogs barked. But the city did not panic. It watched with awe. Edward held his breath as the train entered the first tunnel. Darkness wrapped around them. The lamps glowed bright against the stone walls. The hum echoed like soft thunder. Henry whispered, "We're really doing it." They emerged onto the river bridge, elevated high above the shimmering water. Moonlight touched the metal rails, turning them into glowing silver lines stretching into the unknown. The cool night air rushed into the carriage. The city light twinkled below. The river moved like black silk. Edward felt tears gather in his eyes. This is the world changing," he said. William glanced back with a proud smile. "And you're part of it, son." The train accelerated again, smooth as a gliding bird, powerful as lightning. The old iron bridge trembled, but held firm. Sparks flickered from the wires overhead like tiny fireflies celebrating the moment. Far behind them, the old city shrank into a distant cluster of yellow dots. Ahead lay open tracks, long curves, steep climbs, every one of them conquered with quiet, precise power. Edward looked at the glowing gauges, the moving shadows, the dancing reflections in the windows, and understood. Tonight, the city wasn't just watching history. It was becoming history. And he was sitting right at its heart. The dawn that changed everything, the night test had pushed the electric train farther, faster, and smoother than anyone ever imagined. But now came the most important part. Returning home, the old city waited. Waiting for the sound of progress. Waiting for the train that symbolized tomorrow. Waiting for the boys who left as dreamers and were now coming back as witnesses of the future. The sky was pale silver when the train began its final approach. A thin layer of fog floated low along the riverbanks, curling gently around the stone bridges. Soft birdsong echoed through the quiet morning. Edward stood at the front window of the leading carriage. The world outside was calm, peaceful, ideal. Yet inside him, everything was moving. Memories, dreams, hopes, fears, all swirling like mist caught in morning light. Henry joined him, rubbing his hands together. "Feels strange," he said, "like we went out into a different world. And now we're returning to the old one." Edward nodded slowly. "Maybe the world has changed," he said. "Or maybe we have." Behind them, William Carter performed the final system checks. His tired eyes shone with pride. "You boys did well," he said quietly. "Last night wasn't just a test. It was a promise. A promise that the city will never fall behind again." Electric sparks shimmered above the roof as the train glided across the river bridge. The water below reflected the glowing lamps, turning them into small floating moons. As they neared the station, Edward saw something he did not expect. Crowds, massive crowds. More than last night. Men, women, children. Factory workers, still in soot-covered aprons. Fishermen, straight from the piers. Teachers holding notebooks. Entire families standing together, all gathered to welcome the train home. Lanterns hung from rooftops. Flags waved softly in the morning breeze. People stood shoulder to shoulder, eyes wide with wonder. Henry whispered, "They stayed up all night." Edward smiled. "No, they waited all night." The closer the train came, the louder the cheering grew. Not wild, not chaotic, but warm and full of pride. The kind of cheering that makes your heart swell and your eyes sting. The electric train entered the station like a silver dawn, smooth, silent, beautiful. As the brakes whispered and the wheels slowed, an old man stepped forward from the crowd, the same one who had doubted the project months ago. His cane trembled in his hand, but his voice was steady. "You boys," he said, pointing at Edward and Henry. "You brought tomorrow into our city." Edward stepped down slowly, feeling the cool stone beneath his boots. The old man placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "I doubted electric power," he admitted, "but tonight showed us hope." Edward swallowed hard, and then he looked around. At William Carter standing proudly beside the glowing carriage, at the wires humming softly overhead, at the rising sun painting the station gold. And he realized this was not just a story about a train. It was a story about people, their fears, their dreams, their courage to change. The electric train had not replaced the old life. It had simply added a new chapter. Henry nudged him. "Come on, Edward. They want you to speak." Edward laughed nervously and stepped forward. He took a deep breath. "The old city," he said softly, "is no longer old. It is alive. And the first electric train is only the beginning." The crowd erupted into applause, and through that sound, warm and powerful, Edward felt something settle inside him. Peace, purpose, and the gentle truth that he had become part of history. Soothing, almost like a bedtime lullaby. A new day had begun, and the future had arrived gently, like morning light. If you enjoyed this calm and nostalgic journey through the arrival of the first electric train, then take a deep breath, relax, and gently close your eyes. More peaceful bedtime stories, more journeys, more dreams are waiting for you on this channel. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share, so you never miss the next relaxing storytelling experience. Good night, and may your dreams ride on quiet rails.